Correct. Okay, so I want to talk to you today about some of the different kinds of approaches to collaborative giving, what some of the benefits and challenges are, different ways to do collaborative giving, and of course, I'm also going to be sharing some very specific examples to help illustrate some of these points. So just a little bit about the organization I represent, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. I imagine all of you have heard of John D. Rockefeller. He's the gentleman whose picture is there in black and white. He and his family formed a number of charitable and philanthropic organizations over the years, beginning with the Rockefeller Foundation itself in 1916. Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors was formed in 2002, so we are about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And we were originally part of the Rockefeller Family Office. So we were advising individual members of the Rockefeller family, many of whom wanted to do collaborative giving. And that is how we first got engaged in collaborative giving. Since 2002, we've become an independent nonprofit organization, although half of our board of directors are members of the Rockefeller family. So we are still deeply engaged with their philanthropic traditions. But we're now working with over 200 philanthropies of one type or another, corporate, public sector, private, collaborative funds, around the world and facilitating more than 400 million US dollars per year in giving across a wide variety of issue areas and countries. So we do strategy and consulting. We help manage and implement projects. And we also engage in something that in the US is called fiscal sponsorship, but is probably better described as incubation. As a public charity in the United States and also in the UK, we are able to be the host organization for a new initiative that is not yet ready to have its own charitable status, or that has a limited life and is going to conclude its work in a defined period of time. And through that capacity, we are working with a couple dozen funder collaboratives. So a little bit about our history in funder collaboratives. I mentioned that the Rockefeller family members were interested in this as an approach to giving. And the first funder collaborative that our organization was involved in is a great example of why people and foundations choose to do this kind of work. The goal was to help preserve forest lands in the Northeast of the United States and actually even across the border into Canada. There were a number of donors who were located in different states within that region. Their giving was limited to those states, but the forests and the forces that were threatening the forests don't recognize local boundaries and barriers. So a group of funders across several regions and states within the Northeast United States and even in Southern Canada banded together, pooled their resources, commissioned a map of what were the most vulnerable areas across this northern forest, and co-funded efforts to protect those sources. And that was something that no single funder could have done independently. And that's an example of how many of the issues that we care about most deeply don't respect the boundaries of geography that people have created over time through their political processes. We are currently hosting about 27 funder collaboratives. We've published a lot in this area. We have a guide about collaborative giving, and we have a couple of publications about systems change that focus on how funders are collaborating to achieve those kinds of complex goals. All of these resources are available on our website, and we'll be happy to send links to AEF after this call to make sure that you have access to them. So the benefits of collaborative giving. As I mentioned, one immediate benefit is that a funder collaborative can allow you to link up to do cross-border activities if your philanthropy is limited to one particular geographic region. And many funders have found that that's a helpful way to deal with a problem that stretches beyond its borders. It's also often much more rewarding to be able to pool resources and make a smaller number of larger gifts than a bigger number of smaller individual gifts. There is much more impact and much more awareness generated when there's one large gift that has 10 organizations behind it than a single organization, with exceptions of the really large players in Spain, like Caixa, in the US, the Gates Foundation. But I also want to say that even the Gates Foundation participates in funder collaboratives. They see enhanced opportunities to innovate, to experiment by doing things that sort of are separate from their usual programmatic funding. In certain circumstances, becoming part of a funder collaborative can also reduce the risk of doing something that's innovative or experimental. No one foundation or funder is taking all the risk alone by trying something innovative in, let us say, climate mitigation. It's a pool of funders who have made a collective decision, and that helps reinforce the idea that this risk may be worth taking. And it means that careful consideration has gone into it when many organizations have agreed to try an experiment, even if the experiment doesn't work, right? Not all experiments will succeed. But many funders are more comfortable with extreme risk-taking if they're part of a collaborative. There's much more thoughtful decision-making as part of a funder collaborative because it isn't simply one person's decision. There's a lot of time that goes into making decisions, which obviously has some disadvantages, but the end result of having a group of dedicated people thinking out loud together is often better than one individual's decision. I think for many people who are new to philanthropy or new to a particular field in philanthropy, there's a great opportunity to learn by joining in a funder collaborative. If your foundation is new, for example, to the field of early childhood, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of research. There are a lot of models. And one way to develop some expertise is to join a funder collaborative and work with funders who have been working in this field for decades or more. I think you're also likely to get to know other funders and other experts in the field by participating in a funder collaborative. And that enhanced network of professional colleagues can be useful even outside the funder collaborative. These are people whom you can turn to. They are people whom you get to know, just as Rosa and I got to know and trust one another by being on a board together. People who have been in funder collaboratives become one another's trusted colleagues. And then finally, but this is the last advantage I'll mention, but to me, it's not the least at all. It really reduces the burden on a lot of charitable organizations to have 10 funders making one grant rather than 10 funders, each making 10 grants. If you think about it from the point of view of the charity, they are submitting one application instead of 10. They submit one report instead of 10. So that is in an era in which foundations rightfully want a lot of information about impact, the burden on charities can be lessened without in any way abandoning the commitment to reporting by having a shared application and a shared report on impact. So I have to say, though, there are some challenges, obviously. Different funders have different priorities. They have different visions about how change happens. And those visions and priorities are, of course, legitimate. For example, in early childhood, some people are interested in brain research. Other people are interested in quality of healthcare and access to vaccines and other kinds of treatment. Neither of those is right or wrong. Those are different priorities. Sometimes in the field of philanthropy, we don't always define our terms well. So if we're talking, for example, about equity and access to healthcare, that might mean different things to different people. And if we don't take the time to really define our terms, misunderstandings creep in later. I think it's also important to remember that as in any group, even though there may be a lot of enthusiasm, shared commitment, and even though people may know one another well, it is very important to have clarity on roles and responsibilities and to have a real clear governance process. If there are 15 funders in the collaborative, must every funder agree on every grant? What is the process for getting that agreement? What happens if, for example, Marisol leaves her position in her organization? Is her successor automatically empowered? How does that happen? Not agreeing on those things ahead of time can create problems down the road. I think it's also can be difficult in a funder collaborative when circumstances in the world change and people may need to reallocate their resources or feel that the road that they're on is not delivering the impact that they want. Different people have different levels of patience for an initiative, especially an experimental one, and they may feel that they are not getting what they want in the time that they wanted. So it is very important to be clear, if you're committing to this funder collaborative, have you committed funding for 1 year? Have you committed funding for 3 years? Is there an exit mechanism if you're not happy after the second year? All of those things really need to be worked out in advance. Similarly, it's very important that there's a good way to make sure that information is shared across all of the members, even if, as is true in some of our funder collaboratives, there's only a small subset who are making the funder decisions. It's very important that all of the stakeholders get information, learning, and knowledge. For many of them, that's the core reason that they've joined. And then sadly, sometimes you have to deal with issues about lack of trust. That often prevents people from joining a funder collaborative, but it can also become a factor in the midst of a collaborative if some of the members of the group feel that the rules of governance are not being followed clearly. That can really set people back. And then finally, many funder collaboratives start with a lot of enthusiasm and commitment, and they may choose a goal for the initiative that far surpasses what resources are available. So it is not possible, for example, to do groundbreaking research on brain development in infants with, €100,000. That is not possible, right? So the goals and the level of funding have to be adjusted without regard to emotion, shall we say, right? And that is, human beings want to do the most they can, and sometimes they need to adjust their expectations. I think speaking of defining terms, collaboration really takes many forms, from very high integration to very high independence. So starting from the bottom up, just an exchange of knowledge on a regular basis is what some people mean by funder collaboration. For example, in the state of Michigan in the United States, a couple of funders from family foundations put together an early childhood learning collaborative. The members of that collaborative met before COVID in person, but we all know how that goes. 2 to 4 times per year. They heard from expert speakers. They shared information about their own funding programs. They made internal resources and research available to one another in a way that they would not make available to the general public, but they made their own independent funding decisions. It was a learning community, is one way to put it. And that's often a good starting point for a group of organizations that are interested in collaboration, is to start with a learning community to build trust and to identify shared areas of interest. Second is an effort, the kind of effort where funders meet together, agree on what the priority areas are for a particular field, but they maintain their individual grant-making rights. In the United States, for example, there's an organization called the Democracy Alliance, which is a resource for funders who have progressive political goals. And that organization helps identify what the priority issue areas might be and what organizations are doing the best work. However, each funder who belongs to that collaborative makes an independent decision about what to fund. There's often a minimum funding level in the field that's identified for organizations like this in order to make sure that people really are on a level playing field, and that the work that's being done to identify these strategies is really going to have an impact. At the very high end of integration is the kind of initiative in which one funder has total control. In the United States, there's an organization, a private family foundation, originally family foundation, now independent, called the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation. For many decades, they invested in helping families get out of poverty. They invested in early childhood. They invested in access to healthcare. They invested in better education. They invested in job training, a whole suite of services to help lift families out of the cycle of poverty. And in many ways, because they became successful, they were able to ask other funders who had less experience with this kind of work to, in essence, turn their resources over to the Clark Foundation. And the Clark Foundation retains all of the decision-making rights. The other funders get information, they get reports, they get opportunities to learn, but it's not really, in some ways, literally, a funder collaborative. Only one funder is making the decisions. Most funder collaboratives live in these two spots here where you're co-creating a new initiative or you're co-investing in an existing initiative where all of the members have a certain amount of control and no one member is able to make decisions unilaterally. So I'll just give you a few models and then turn to some examples. There are organizations that are what we would call intermediaries that have a particular mission. One example is the Global Fund for Women, which attracts donations from around the world, from individuals and even foundations, corporate foundations, among others, that want to support women's organizations at the grassroots level, but do not have the resources to understand what organizations are really viable and doing good work in places like Tanzania, Papua New Guinea, or even difficult areas to work in Alaska. So they make donations to the Global Fund for Women, which does all of this work and due diligence and allocates the money. Some of these intermediaries will allow you to specify, I want my funds to go to Cambodia. Others say, no, you're going to support the organizations that we select across the board. That's the mission that we have. More common in my world at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors are funder collaboratives and pooled funds, where funders are pooling their money and their intellectual resources and making shared decisions. Often they want a neutral platform in which to donate the money, distribute the money, and engage staff and expert consultants. So we do that work. The network of European foundations in Brussels plays a similar kind of role. There are also, and have been, I think, for centuries, in communities all around the world, individual donor giving circles. These are not really formal organizations often. In the United States, they may be housed at a community foundation, but this is an informal group of people. They may belong to the same church. They may be part of an extended family. They may know one another through their businesses or something, but they agree to get together, share information, and pool generally a modest amount of money to make grants to local organizations. And those are often, for many people, a great introduction to the world of giving, or they're a great introduction to giving in a new issue area. And then finally, there are very large scale kinds of public-private partnerships where private funders work with the public sector. For example, two of the Italian banking foundations in the city of Torino worked with the public sector to renovate two museums as part of building the economic base for the city. Often after a disaster, there's coordination between public and private partnerships. In the COVID crisis, for example, the Virgin Unite is coordinating a large number of donors to work in partnership with the Africa Center for Disease Control to help get resources into Africa. So those are examples of when a public-private partnership can be especially helpful. So here are a few specific examples that I wanted to share with you. One is called the Fund for Shared Insight. What is interesting about this collaborative is that it has 78 total funders. That's massive. Some of them are core funders, meaning that they are contributing millions of dollars, US dollars a year, and are part of the decision-making committee. Other funders are contributing much more modest resources directed toward particular pieces of the initiative. What this project has evolved to do is to help provide funding to charitable organizations to help them assess whether they are meeting the needs of their beneficiaries. In other words, let's say that you are providing a nursery program for 2-year-olds in your local town. Are you doing a good job or not? How do you know that? This program will give you funding to ask your constituents a very brief, easy to answer series of short questions that are standardized enough so that your responses can be compared to the responses of other providers of early childhood education. And it helps, it's part in many ways of the drive in philanthropy around the world to think about the people who are using the services of charities as customers and not passive beneficiaries, to treat them as full-fledged individuals and partners, to treat them as customers, in other words, even though they may not be paying customers, they may have a choice. So that's that program, as the interest in participatory giving and the voice of the beneficiary began to be of higher interest to more funders, took off like wildfire, and now it has 78 funders. A second example I wanted to share comes from Colombia, where 17 foundations, almost all of them family foundations, some corporate, who met one another through their association of foundations in Colombia, similar to AEF, and decided to pool some resources to co-fund in the area of increasing access to clean water, which is a challenging process in a lot of disadvantaged communities in Colombia, as well, of course, as in many places around the world. They shared the costs of doing research to figure out where to focus on. They had to develop a common code of governance and shared financial commitment. And they asked members to agree to this code. And 2 members felt after a certain period of time that they were not happy with how decisions were being made and what was being accomplished, and they left the collaborative. So that's an example of some of the kinds of problems that can be encountered on the road. Nonetheless, this collaborative continues to enjoy, I think, a reasonable amount of success, given that it's a very complex problem. At the other end is the Global Commons Alliance, which has some of the largest funders in the world, the Oak Foundation in Switzerland, the Moore Foundation in California. What's interesting about this alliance is that it includes grant makers and grant seekers like Conservation International. And they are sharing information. This means that Conservation International, for example, must share its information with other conservation organizations that it might think of as a competitor for donations. And it is trying to support science-based action and to get science-based solutions adopted by citizens, by companies, as well as by the public sector. That's a very big, complicated project. It has some very significant funding that allows it to commission research. But managing a partnership with more than 50 members is not an easy task. That too requires a lot of financial resource, by the way. So that is something to think about with a collaborative. It costs money to get people to manage these kinds of projects. A newer collaborative in Europe is called Transform, and it's a transnational European collaborative, including foundations in France, Germany, Belgium, Spain until 2019, and some other countries in the UK, looking to understand what the most promising practices are for integrated care in communities. We face problems in our society, not only with early childhood, an example I've been using throughout this conversation, but also in terms of elder care. As the population of baby boomers ages, this creates a lot of pressure on many communities. What are the right models for helping to care for people throughout their life cycle, given changes in family structure, urbanization, and the lack of resources in many rural communities around the world. So this is a new foundation that's looking to examine some best practices that can be adopted and adapted for local communities. And then finally, another climate project. This is a series of research projects that are funded at a very high level of financial support by very large foundations, as you see through the three examples here. Packard in the US, Oak in Switzerland, and IKEA, which is located in the Netherlands, but you know, it's the Swedish company. And they are simply pooling their resources to support research that they believe could result in actual scientific breakthroughs. And what they're doing is making very large and very unrestricted multi-year awards. They feel that there are too many constraints on many researchers working in university settings, that they have to juggle too many sources of funding, that they don't get funding over a long enough period of time to pursue creative new ideas, and that public sector support for climate research is often rather conservative, which is not surprising. The public sector is accountable to the public. But these foundations are willing to risk funding projects that never result in anything useful. So this is an example of philanthropy as risk-taking at a very high level. But these foundations are mitigating their risk because they're sharing decision-making and analysis with other smart foundations. And that helps give them a sense that they are making good decisions in a risky area. So with that, let me mention just briefly as a summation, some of the best practices that we see. I've mentioned this already, and I can't emphasize it enough. Having governance procedures, even if you are working with people that you've known for a very long time, is important. It just keeps things on a neutral level. If one person suddenly comes into the room and says, I heard about something really wonderful and we should really divert all our funding over to this. You have a sort of process in place that is not personal to that idea that can help manage the situation. You do have to define your values, and you also have to define how you're going to measure results. You have to decide on how you're going to bring on partners, and you have to agree on a time horizon. Another thing that's important to agree on, this sounds silly, is to decide who gets the credit. Some of the examples that I shared with you are organizations that have their own independent name, the Climate Breakthrough Project. When you issue a statement about the research results that have been funded, do you just say the Climate Breakthrough Project, or do you name all the organizations that funded? And how do you make those decisions? Do you put everybody's logo on the website? What about people who want to be participating anonymously? All of that has to be worked out, ideally in advance. And then constant communications, externally and internally, is really important. So let's say that you have decided, with Rosa's support and guidance, that you would like to start a funder collaborative. Here are some of the questions that we would suggest you ask yourselves. Why is this, if this is our focus area, why are we the right group of funders to attack this focus area? Is it because we want to learn? Or is it because we believe that we could figure out where the breakthrough is likely to occur? You're going to have very different strategies if you are more on the learning side, as opposed to more on the breakthrough discovery side. And you need to be honest with yourselves about how close you are to being able to identify breakthroughs. And then you need to be asking yourselves, what impact do we want to create? Potentially the impact is only for you as the participants, that you want to learn, and that learning will help your foundations individually make better decisions in the future. That's a good goal, but that's very different from saying, we want to transform the system of integrated care in our community. And then you need to ask yourselves, what is each partner willing to invest? Are we okay if different partners are investing different amounts of money? And how will we make decisions about our investments? It's also really, I think, important to say, do we really need to collaborate to do this? Collaboration takes time. It takes effort. It has a cost. Somebody is going to have to make it work, right? And that you have to ask the question, is that the best use of people's time and money? And then finally, what is our timeline? How will we know we're making progress? What will give us comfort if we're tackling a complex problem, to see some milestones along the way? So those are some of the things to ask. I'm obviously enthusiastic about collaboration, but it's not a magic process. It's not always the right thing to do, and it takes a lot of work. So I believe that often the results are worthwhile, but you have to put the groundwork in place. So I'll stop there. I thank you very much for your time and attention. And if we have time for any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
We do. Thank you, Melissa. Wow. Well, I probably we can probably share the presentation. Yes. With participants afterwards. That will be very good, and we will also be, putting this the recording of the session in our YouTube channel, so you will get notice about it. So in case you want to review it. Well, those 5 questions, Melissa, that you put at the end, are a very, you're leaving us with homework, I would say. You're leaving us with homework, because some of our members, but it is very good. Some of our members have already expressed the desire to start collaborating. And I think, by starting to answer those 5 questions, is probably the way we should start the conversation. So I'm really grateful for that. We do have, I would say, 10 minutes. I know it will be to go over the hour, but we started too late. So I think we can go there. We've got 10 minutes for any questions. So whoever is willing to ask a question, just unmute yourself and go ahead. Bettina, you can go. Yep, please.
Thank you. Melissa, thank you so much for this presentation and sharing all this knowledge. 2 quick questions. One, have you found it's more successful when you direct the topic and put the people in the room, or if it's a funder who brings the leadership? That's my first question. The second one is, how have you seen impact funds meshing with this topic, so bringing the financial world? Do you have any experience in being that part of that group? Thank you.
Yeah, those are excellent questions, Bettina. Our experience is that it works better when the funders are driving the idea. Having said that, I would also add that it's better if the funder, let's say there's one funder that has the idea first, if that funder begins right away to invite other funders into the conversation, rather than making all of the decisions about what is supposed to happen, that doesn't give other funders a sense that they are really true participants in the process. So that's what I would say. In terms of, are you asking in your second question, Bettina, about impact investing?
Correct. Yes.
Yes, we are just starting with some projects that will include both grant making and investing. And up to now, most of the people who have come to us interested in impact investing have needed to be independent investors because of the restrictions on their investing activity. So corporations, some of the corporations, including banks that we're working with, have some of those kinds of restrictions. I think over time, with comfort in impact investing, there'll be greater acceptance of the idea of a collaborative pool. There are some, but that's an emerging field, I would say, right?
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks.
Yeah.
I cannot see everyone because I'm flipping into 2 screens. So if anyone is willing to ask a question, let's go for it.
Well, as Rosa said, I teach global philanthropy at Columbia, so I could ask you questions. How many of you have been part of a funder collaborative already? Anyone? You can just raise your hand. You don't need to speak.
Well, we are getting into unknown territory, Melissa.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody brought us a question, which is there any channel you would recommend to find international partners? It seems that for that people, it's quite easy to find, partners here in Spain, But how do you find partners if you want to, an international coalition? How to make that?
So I think, there are the organization AEF is part of a network of national philanthropy associations all across Europe. So the Dutch Foundation Association, the Swiss Foundation, et cetera. That's one network that you can connect into. In addition, by issue area, there are a number of organizations. There is Ariadne, which is an international organization, Europe-based, that of funders in human rights, and it has a counterpart organization in the US. There are similar organizations in climate, I believe. I think another opportunity is to potentially approach some of the funders that are already active in collaborations, like Gulbenkian in Portugal or King Baudouin in Brussels. They already have lots of partners, and they would be happy to share information if it means that more funding is going to go toward the issues they care about.
Thank you, Melissa. That gives us an idea. I mean, we can share after the session, some of the names that you share. So some of our sister organizations in the rest of Europe and also in the States. I mean, we have done that. Sometimes some of our members approach us and say, we're looking for a partner in a country that is working in this specific area. And we're willing to, connect you with the National Association of Foundations of that country. We are connected with most of the national associations of foundations around the world and also in the States. So this is something that we have done in the past, and we can provide you with names. That's great.
Yes, there are associations like this, not just in Europe and the US, but in Latin America and in Africa.
Absolutely.
And also in Asia.
Yeah, we are part of a big network in which is a global network, which is WINGS, that gathers more than 150 organizations of this kind all around the world. So if you need help approaching someone, for us it's very important that you know what you are looking for. And when you know what you are looking for, we can probably we can probably help you. We're really running out of time now, and I think, we would like to, give Melissa, if there is anything you would like to add before we close, and then we will end up with saying thank you.
I think that it sounds as if you are potentially ready to start, and that there's nothing wrong with starting small and concrete and building out from there. That will help build trust. That will help you test processes and governance. That will help you minimize risk. And it will give you a tremendous learning platform, whether or not it turns into a bigger collaborative afterwards.
Well, this is very good advice. Very good advice. I think one of the things that the sector we've always been claiming is to increase collaboration, and there are many ways to collaborate. And as you see, is a known territory, Funders Collaborative in this country. So we've got a learning journey ahead of us, but we are willing to help in that journey. Yes. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone, and especially Melissa, for being with us today. As she mentions, there are a lot of resources in their website. There are some of them that are translated into Spanish. We are happy to put together, the links and send them to you, because they are extraordinarily interesting. And thank you very much to all of you, and we hope to see you again in some of our future activities around grant making and collaboration. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you all, and I wish you all the best in your new explorations.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pues muchas gracias a todas, a todos, y nada, que tengáis la mejor de las tardes posibles. Si tenéis cualquier duda, nos podéis escribir tanto a Rosa como a mí y os orientamos, recogemos vuestras propuestas también si queréis que hagamos alguna otra intervención o propuesta de charla, nos vendrá estupendo cualquier propuesta que queráis hacernos. Muchas gracias por haber estado con nosotras esta tarde.